Could I say something controversial that I think sometimes with this too, that maybe people are trying to do too sophisticated of testing for their level of maturity, like they're running before they walk?
Hello and welcome to another coffee break episode on the Conversion Podcast, where we provide easy to digest and easily to apply insights on digital experimentation, conversion optimization, and customer experience in the time it takes to grab a coffee. Today we are joined by Steph, one of our senior consultants here at Conversion, to talk about evolving perspectives on program maturity and a new maturity framework that you can apply to get more value from your experimentation program.
Welcome to the podcast, Steph. Great to have you on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, I thought we'd tee this one up on the topic around program maturity models, and especially the idea of evolving our perspectives here. With that, I think we can just start a very, very basic question, just if someone's joining into this and not really knowing what a maturity model is. What actually is a maturity model?
Yeah, sure. So to me, I guess a maturity model is there to help benchmark your experimentation program and help guide you to become the best that you can be and be using experimentation to its fullest potential.
Is there a reason why it's important when we think about a company and the experimentation program, or the function of experimentation within it?
Yeah, it's really important to be looking at maturity because A, it can help you get more investment if you're actually looking to progress, but B, it will help you make the most of experimentation. So you're not just sort of randomly A/B testing, and you're not just sort of selecting the odd bit of research that will support your test. You're actually strategically using it as a growth function for your business.
I think we've, across 18 years, started to see there's obviously different stages of maturity with different types of companies. Is there like a very historical way that we've looked at maturity, or even the industry has looked at maturity of an experimentation program?
Yeah, there is definitely. So I do have a little slide to show you actually.
If you are listening, we'll have this up on the screen. If you can't, we'll just add this as a note at the end if you want to look at it.
So we have this framework called Packet. And the entire sort of premise of Packet is based on this idea that there are constraints that can be sort of addressed in order to ensure that you can scale a process. And that can be applied to experimentation programs. So what we used to say is that everything sort of comes down to process, accountability, culture, expertise, and technology. But what we've kind of found along the way is that Packet doesn't really provide the sort of stepping stones and a nice visual for people to see like how far along they are against maturity. And it's missing like a couple of key pieces. So I've been working on a new extended version of this maturity model and been using it to kind of test and learn, see how it goes. We're always sort of optimizing the way that we look at maturity because, as you know, the experimentation landscape's always changing. So we have to make sure we're always changing the sort of frameworks that we're using too. But Packet is kind of what we used to use and now moving into this newer world.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a really good point here too about how to think about maturity, but then actually applying of like how do you move through actually taking your maturity to a new level, especially around Packet. It was great at saying like, hey, here's how to think about maybe where you're constrained, but then it's like, what do I actually do about it? And I think based on what you've shown me teeing this conversation up, I think there's some very, very cool stuff of how people can actually go out and really move to a different stage of maturity. How is this changing then? How is maybe specifically your ideas around it evolved? And maybe even if you can give a little backstory of what's caused you to think about, hey, if we did this could improve how we can think about moving maturity along.
Yeah, sure. So I guess backstory is that I was working with a client that was hitting their sort of 3-year mark. And we always look at the 3 V's, so volume, velocity, and value. And those are like our measures of success for a program alongside this sort of Packet framework. And I kind of noticed that this client was consistently hitting the amount of tests they should, like the volume, the velocity, the speed of the testing was good, and they were always seeing the value, so they were learning and earning. So it became the question of like, well, what's next? They're clearly ready for the next step. And then looking at Packet, looking at the 3 V's, we were sort of missing this piece of the rest of the maturity model. So that's kind of where it came from. There are sort of 5 stages that I started to map out. So thinking about all the clients that I've worked with and the clients that a few of the others have, and being in-house prior to that, I started to look at like, what have I experienced and what do I see as the landscape for maturity.
Nice.
So first of all, we look at people that are reactive. So these testing teams are sort of ad hoc, they're sporadic. They're sort of initiated by like one person sort of banging that experimentation drum and hoping to get some testing done. They don't really have a strategy and they're really not supported at all from like the leadership point of view. They're just sort of edging in slowly. And we'll come into more detail about how we sort of measure who is reactive and what that looks like. But then the next stage after that is emerging. So experimentation really begins to gain some buy-in here. So there's going to be maybe a small team or some individuals that have banded together to start to get some rigor behind that experimentation. But there's not really a formal framework or strategy. And maybe you have like a couple of people starting to pipe up and starting to get excited about A/B testing, but you don't have that formal buy-in. Then the third stage is strategic, where we see a lot of people. And this is really when experimentation is recognized as a strategic activity by the business. You have some buy-in, and there is some form of framework or process in place to help you get A/B tests out the door. But it's not sort of integrated with every part of the business. It's not sort of the bread and butter of what you do. And when you're strategic as well, you do have tests that line up to a business goal.
I think just stepping through it, particularly on, I think each step is, okay, this is where they're at, but this is also like their constraint. I think that contrast is like perfect to kind of like have people visualize even what bucket they might be in.
Okay, cool. So the fourth stage is integrated, and this is really where experimentation starts to sit across the whole organization. So it's not just sort of one team. Yes, they may be acting as some sort of center of excellence, but there are multiple people doing testing across the company, and they're actively participating in that shared culture of an experimentation mindset. So you've got that buy-in from senior leadership. They understand this is fundamental to the business, and you've also got people sort of starting to challenge the law of the business and use experimentation to do that. What you maybe don't have at this stage, at this integrated stage, is that experimentation is at the core of your company. Perhaps you're pushing towards it and you're starting to go that way, but you're not quite seeing that everyone has that experimentation mindset and using it as a competitive advantage.
Yeah, totally.
Whereas in contrast, the last stage, optimize, this is where experimentation is just part of your business. It is in everything that you do. So these are the Amazons, the Netflix, the Booking.coms. They're the companies that are living and breathing that mindset, and that's deeply embedded into their culture. So you can see how from reactive to optimize, there's a lot that you're going to need to do to get there.
It's a huge spectrum, I would say, in particular.
I was just going to say what's interesting about them as well is that with the maturity model, you don't necessarily just have to be in one bucket. So we go on to sort of look at the 4 areas of each of these that we can rank you against to understand where you are with maturity. So you might be strategic in the goals of your program, but maybe you're not strategic and you're actually emerging when it comes to research and the data and the tools. And so we set specific goals around those to help you move all of the parts of your program across this maturity model.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, maybe can you just dive in at least and give a taste to the areas too that people should think about?
Yeah, sure. So the first one is experiment goals. So I've got an example here where we've got a smiley face under strategic. And essentially what I would do with a client is talk to them about how they think their program is going and how experimentation is perceived at their company. And obviously make my own assessment as well against that packet framework and against what we're seeing here. So when it comes to experiment goals, this is really what are you trying to achieve with experimentation? So reactive, you have a lack of a program goal. Emerging, you have a lack and there isn't really a single primary KPI, but you are starting to question whether or not that's correct. And ROI has started to show up for some tests. Strategic is where you have that goal. It's aligned with a business goal and you have clear success metrics. Integrated then moves on a little bit further where you're talking about business goals, pushing the boundaries of those. So not just looking at revenue, but looking at those learnings as well and actively scaling to achieve more experiments within those goals. And then optimized takes that again a step further where you have really rigorous tracking, very clearly defined KPIs and insights that are shared business-wide. They're actively scaling and they're running more and more tests, building that culture of testing. And you may have sort of multiple strategic goals across the business that are pushing the boundaries and contributing to the overall success. So something like, for example, Amazon tests everything. So Prime was an experiment, right? That's something that completely questioned the law of their business. And now it's a massive part of what they do and a massive product. So that's where that kind of goal of experimentation sits for optimized.
And how about the other ones?
So we then have delivery and process. So this is really where you're looking at how many experiments are you running, how well are you running them, and what's the process that sits behind there, and are people following it? So right from reactive, where you have occasional experiments, no real tracking in place to understand like where in the process your experiments might be getting lost or hung up. There's a lack of understanding around even the terms, volume and velocity and value, and how, those are important for experimentation. And there's really no clear framework to
Can I ask you
emerging.
just one tangent on that real quick? So I think like velocity and volume are some degree of like maybe self-explanatory, where velocity, we're thinking about how quickly we can actually run experiments from an idea to actually get a result, maybe make a decision. We've got volume. This is just quantity. And we know there's a little bit of like testing is humbling. The more experiments we run, the more instances we're going to gather. I think value is an interesting one, though, that maybe is less well explained. How would you define value in the context of experimentation?
Yeah, so value is interesting because it shifts as you mature, I would say. So in the beginning, it's very important to have a goal that's centered around revenue and driving that revenue from your experimentation program. And the reason for that is you need to get buy-in from the senior leadership team. And to be able to spend money on experimentation, you need to be making money with experimentation. So that value very early on should be, what revenue are you bringing your business through experimentation? And then as you sort of mature, what you're able to do is see beyond the revenue and actually look at learnings. So it might be things like, running a fake door test for a new product that you want to release. But instead of just going through the entire product life cycle and research cycle and spending weeks on that, you're just doing the painted door. So you're not immediately seeing that revenue impact. You're saving time, and it means that you might see it later down the line. So those are the kind of differences between value.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. I think that's super valuable to call out. After delivery and process, what kind of comes next as an area that someone should focus on?
Strategy and culture, which is
Big
huge.
one. Yeah.
I'm not going to talk through all of this, but I guess a lot of it centers around the belief in experimentation, the mindset that you have to adopt, and the way that people are bought into it and how they're following sort of the processes, the frameworks, and then questioning the processes and frameworks and making sure they're always optimizing those. So not just, doing what's always been done. It comes down to that mindset again.
Nice.
And then the last one, so there's 4, is data and tools. And this is really about what research you're doing and what tools do you have available for you to conduct that research and do it well. And then what testing tool are you using? And does that support the advancements you want to make in this maturity space? So for example, are you only doing WYSIWYG tests where you yourself as the consultant or the product owner or whatever are dragging and dropping stuff? Or are you getting to a place where you're actually able to run multivariant tests, or looking at different statistical methods to optimize the way that you're running experimentation? So again, a massive scale here. And you could, again, be sort of straddling between these places.
Could I say something controversial that I think sometimes with this too, that maybe people are trying to do too sophisticated of testing for their level of maturity, like they're running before they walk?
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely happens. And I think the same can be said for this idea of volume and velocity. Like volume is good, but only if you're actually putting out good tests, right? It has to be quality as well. And velocity the same. If you're moving quickly but making too many mistakes along the way because of the speed, then again, it's about questioning that velocity. So I think that there is a lot of nuance with this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Very cool. How can someone actually go about, I am interested in this, I'm passionate, I want to push the program along. What would be some advice you'd give of how to actually go about putting this into practice?
Yeah, so I would honestly have a look at these different stages in detail. The way that I go about it is sort of trying to rank based on these bullet points that in the visuals you'll be able to see where you're sitting. And it's okay if even within data and tools, you're actually straddling emerging and strategic, because that means when you look at emerging and you see, there is a lack of integration between testing tools and data platforms, your goal is to then integrate those testing platforms, right? And that's going to help you go towards strategic. So I do have a slide on this here. So for example, this is the kind of thing that I would come up with after I've benchmarked where a client is based on that model. I would then look at, right, what are the top 3 things in the next 6 months we can do to move forward on that maturity model? And it could be something as simple as ensuring you've got those defined KPIs. So doing that KPI tree, setting your guardrails and making sure that you have those to be able to be measured in the testing tool, or at least in one single place.
Yeah.
Doing continuous research, something we see that, most people really aren't doing enough research at all, but it's like the number one thing that's going to improve your experiment program, like quality. And then expanding experimentation's reach. So don't just focus on your app, your website. Think about offline experimentation. Think about the mindset that has to be applied throughout the business, not just sort of A/B tests.
I think the other side of this that I'd love to get your point of view on. I think there's obviously ways that you can learn where it's like, hey, this is a really great idea. I'm going to go try this out. There's the flip side of, I think it's super valuable at times to tap into someone else's experience. They've done this before. They've seen what works, what doesn't. Is there any sort of things in particular that you've seen, especially working across such a broad range and already, I think, have like a ton of experience in this field where you're like, these are areas that either I've been caught before and like kind of caught me. And I was like, I wish I'd known that in advance. That was a barrier we had to overcome. Maybe was unexpected as well.
Good question. Yeah, I could name quite a few, to be fair. I think directly related to maturity, I would say what I've seen is a lot of people are missing the stages of their velocity. So at Conversion, we're very good at measuring right from the moment that experiment has a plan all the way through to launch, and each of those stages, so design, development, the code review, UAT, is tracked, and we know how long each takes. And so that means that if we're seeing that that design's been sat there for 6 days, there's a problem, right? And you can optimize your process. But I've seen a lot of people are completely missing that kind of data. And that means when they've got a velocity problem, they don't know where to look for it. So I would say that is a massive thing, that if you're looking to understand the maturity, that you should definitely implement some sort of velocity tracking for each of those stages.
Yeah, very cool. Kind of the classic, what gets measured gets managed type thing. Okay, well, I just want to say a huge thank you. If you haven't followed Steph before, look at some of her content. She puts a ton of stuff out. She's done a ton of podcasts, not just in Conversion, but outside of it. We will share more around maturity in the notes to this. We'll probably have some more content that'll come out at a later date. Thank you, Steph. Thank you so much for hopping on today. If anyone has ever had questions, I think they can probably find you. What would be the best place to actually even contact us, Steph?
Yeah, definitely. Just drop me a message on LinkedIn, especially if it's about maturity. It's a keen subject of mine right now, so happy to chat through.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.